See it played, Death Ride Kursk, Leibstandarte. Okay, well, my extreme elaboration on fire and movement in an earlier video, which is probably good that I talked it through. Now, well, I'm not convinced one way or the other, but now I'm starting to think that that actually was not the designer's intent. Even though I really like the way that I play, and heck, I might develop that on my own separately. This is why I don't think it's quite as open as I thought it was. So, how did I get to my interpretation? So the exact progression that I went through, which is actually documented pretty well in the videos, right? I started with Hafid Ridge, and when I started with Hafid Ridge, that was when I started with any of the Death Ride games. That was the very beginning. So the idea is I started, and I deliberately started at the very beginning. I started with Hafid Ridge, and it was a struggle to get through those rules because those rules are very succinct. And in that process, I think I picked up some ideas of play from so the rules are very sparse. And from that, I think I picked up certain interpretations of the rules, which I think is pretty inevitable when you have rules of that style. But the thing is, to me, it seemed to work. Then I went to Halfaya Pass. Halfaya Pass is essentially Hafid Ridge. It's just that more of the rules are used because the battle itself is fuller, which primarily means a wider array of troop types. And then I went to Death Ride Salerno, which is a bit more than Hafid Ridge and Halfaya Pass. And now finally Death Ride Kursk. And in the process, I mean, we go from, I don't remember how many pages the original Hafid Ridge rulebook was, but it's a few handfuls of pages. And now we have 130 something. So in the process, there's been a lot of, there's still nice, concise rules, but there's a lot more, well, there are a lot more rules, obviously, but there are some examples, and there's some explanatory material in the latest version that are not there originally. And so basically some areas were, I guess you could say, tightened up, is one way to put it. And I think that's how, so I went from essentially a loose interpretation of the rules out of necessity, because they were the original rules are very sparse, they're almost an outline of rules. And now you definitely have a lot more to go on, basically, a lot more to go on. So this is why I think, this is how I think it's supposed to be now, which is a little narrower, and I am going with this bit more narrow interpretation. And I think the idea is pretty basic, in the sense that before when I said a unit could move 1/2 or less of its movement allowance, it could be marked half moved, and then lit at any other time subsequently in the same operations phase. You could come back and then do its fire at a -2 penalty, and then, for example, you would mark it, let's say fire complete, let's say, or the reverse. your unit fires, and later you come back and it moves up to half. Now I think that these ones actually are done. These are actually done together. And again, the reason I'm interpreting this is this. The three different options: move, full movement allowance, and don't fire at all. That's option 1. Option 2 is fire at no penalty. Fire at no penalty, move up to half. That's the second option. And the third option, of course, is move up to half and then fire at a penalty. That's 3 clear, clear, distinct options. But these 3, and this is where it's going to get tighter than what I said before, these 3 are called regular movement. These are 3 forms of, well, I shouldn't use that word because that's used in another area of the rules, but these are 3 kinds of regular movement. And that, I think, is probably key. So before, when I said the rule that when a unit stack begins movement, you have to complete the movement. As a matter of fact, what's the exact wording? Yeah. In all types of movement, a unit or stack of units must complete its movement before any other unit or units may move. Exception, of course, for overrun. That's always been there. The exception for overrun's always been there. Otherwise, you could never have overrun with more than just 1 unit stack. Each type of movement is in effect for the entire turn for a given unit or stack. That means you can't mix types. You can't mix these types of movement in the same turn. That makes sense. It makes sense because of the movement allowances and the flexibility of all this. Okay. Unless suppression results change that status. Okay. So this is the kind of the technicality. When I read this rule very clearly. I read it numerous times. I was taking movement, and this is where many war games have this problem, or at least potential problem. I was taking movement literally to be the movement of a unit stack through the hex grid. So that's why I was saying that they could finish their movement and then do their fire separately, if eligible. But now I see that movement in this case would be one of the 3 kinds. So basically, to put it another way, you don't have to declare these things, but to make it clear, I choose this unit stack, and basically I'm saying regular movement. I'm choosing regular movement. Again, you don't have to declare it, but because this unit stack will only execute 1 type of movement, and regular movement is 1 type of movement, therefore, that's the movement that has to be completed. So in other words, when this unit stack moves, let's say, moves half, and then fires. Isn't that funny? Why would you need a moved half? Why wouldn't you just have a moved counter? Okay, well, what I thought was, so in effect you're saying regular movement, and then you're choosing one of the 3 kinds. I'm going to do the half movement and then fire with a penalty. And now I'm saying this is 1 form of regular movement which has to be completed before going on to the next unit stack. And so this would be, Well, yeah, if they fired after they moved, then they would be fired complete. But again, why would you need a moved half marker? I'm probably going to go with this more narrow interpretation, but just because it's internally consistent, that doesn't mean it's correct. But I think it's internally consistent because it's regular movement. Regular movement includes the possibility of movement and fire. You still have fire that's separate. The only thing is, why do you have a moved half marker? Well, for what it's worth, it's not clear anymore. Because the rule actually has these the rules actually have these moved full, moved half markers. And what it says is a real question, a real mystery. It says the moved full marker, well, that's obvious, designates that the unit stack has used all its movement allowance for the current turn. Obvious. The move half marker, moved half marker, designates that the unit stack has used only half its available movement allowance, yes, and still has half left to use or may fire. I can't think of a single circumstance, as I understood the rules, where you would ever be completing your movement in two separate, basically, impulses, so to speak. Because I thought when a unit stack starts to move, it has to complete its movement before the next unit stack moves. So again, the thing about or may fire implies back to my earlier interpretation, my looser interpretation of, at one point in the operations phase, you move up to half your movement allowance, and in an entirely different point in the operations phase, you come back and, for example, execute your movement or your fire after movement. I don't understand when you would ever come back and use the remaining half of your movement allowance. Oh, unless that's an optional rule. I guess that's a possibility. Or maybe I got the interpretation, and by the way, there's a third option here. I'm not even sure what number of options I'm up to, but there's a third option. I might have picked up my original understanding of the rules from discussion on Consum World forum. That's very possible. Because I was certain of my earlier interpretation that you can do these things separately. It was only after I made that video that I was thinking, oh, maybe I just picked that up on my own because I thought it was a great, brilliant idea, and it worked. That's the biggest thing, is that it worked. So I don't understand why you wouldn't play that way, is I guess another way to look at it. The process of discovery continues, and it's fun. It's fun.